Hello, everyone. If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
My first day felt completely strange. What if you walked into an American office expecting a normal workday, only to discover that almost everything felt wrong, not because anyone was rude, but because nobody behaved the way you expected? That happened to me on my first morning at my new office in the United States. I thought my biggest challenge would be English. I was wrong. The real challenge was understanding the invisible rules nobody had written down. My name is Anna, and that morning changed the way I understood American office culture, communication, work, marriage, and even myself. I remember standing outside the glass doors with my coffee in one hand and my notebook in the other. I took a deep breath and told myself, "You can do this." My English was not perfect, but I could understand meetings, answer simple questions, and smile confidently when I had no idea what someone had just said. That last skill, by the way, is surprisingly useful. I walked inside and expected a quiet office where everyone would sit seriously at their desks. Instead, two coworkers were laughing near the kitchen. Someone was drinking coffee like it was emergency medicine. And another person walked past me and said, "Morning." I smiled and answered, "Good morning." Then she said, "How's it going?" My brain immediately became a tiny courtroom. Was she actually asking about my life? Was I supposed to explain my marriage, my children, my sleep, and the emotional condition of my refrigerator? I simply said, "Good, thanks. How about you?" She smiled and walked away. That tiny conversation taught me my first lesson. English is not only about translating words. It is also about understanding how people use them. In American workplaces, casual greetings can be a normal way to build connection, not an invitation to give your complete autobiography before 9 a.m. I slowly discovered other differences. People often called coworkers by their first names. Meetings could be friendly but direct. Someone might disagree with an idea and still smile afterward. At first, I found this confusing. Where I came from, disagreement could feel personal. Here, disagreement could simply mean, "Let's examine the idea." My brain needed time to understand that difference. Psychologists often describe this kind of experience as cultural adjustment, when familiar social signals suddenly stop working. Ordinary situations can require much more mental effort. For someone also learning English, that effort can feel exhausting. I started worrying about every sentence. Was my tone too direct? Was I too quiet? Should I speak now? Should I wait? Then something happened during my very first team meeting that made me want to disappear under the conference table. My manager looked at me and said, "What do you think?" Everyone turned toward me. I knew the answer. I knew the English. But suddenly, I could not remember how to speak. And then I made a choice that I would remember for a very long time. Why was everyone so direct? The moment my manager asked for my opinion, I made a decision I still remember. I stopped trying to sound perfect. I looked around the conference table and said, "I think we should change the plan." My voice was quiet, but the room did not explode. Nobody looked offended. Nobody called security. My manager simply asked, "Why?" That one word surprised me. I explained my idea using simple English, one sentence at a time. I expected someone to tell me I was too direct. Instead, my coworkers started asking questions. For the first time, I understood that disagreement in an American office did not automatically mean conflict. It could mean collaboration. That discovery was huge because I had been reading every facial expression like it was a secret message. If someone looked serious, I wondered if they disliked me. If someone disagreed, I thought I had made a mistake. If someone said, "That may not work," I heard, "You are wrong." But American workplace communication often uses direct language to discuss the idea rather than attack the person. Once I understood that difference, meetings became less frightening. I also learned that "how's it going?" did not require a 10-minute report, and "let's talk about it" did not mean I was in trouble. These small phrases became useful English listening practice because I heard them repeatedly in real situations. Instead of memorizing long vocabulary lists, I began collecting short expressions I could actually use. What do you think? I see your point. Could we try another approach? Let me check. Simple English suddenly felt powerful. There was also something funny about American office culture. People could discuss a serious deadline while holding a giant coffee cup and smiling like they were discussing weekend plans. I slowly learned that friendliness and directness could exist together. You could disagree and still be respectful. You could say no and still have a good relationship. You could ask for help without announcing that your career was collapsing. My confidence grew because I stopped translating every conversation word for word. I started listening for meaning, tone, and intention. Learning a language involves more than knowing vocabulary. Understanding context helps you interpret what people actually mean. My manager noticed the change. After one meeting, she pulled me aside and said, "You are speaking up more." I smiled and thanked her. Then she added, "But next time, speak up sooner." I laughed because apparently my new cultural lesson had a sequel. I thought the hardest part of American office culture was learning to speak directly. I was wrong. The real challenge was about to involve something much more personal, a mistake I made in front of the entire team, and a reaction I never expected. The meeting that embarrassed me. The mistake happened on a Wednesday morning, and it was so small that nobody should have remembered it. Unfortunately, my brain decided it was a national emergency. During a team meeting, my manager asked me to explain a project update. I stood up, opened my notes, and began speaking. Everything was going well until I used the wrong word. I wanted to say that the project was delayed, but I accidentally used a word that made the situation sound completely different. A few people looked confused. One coworker smiled. My face became hot. I immediately thought, they think my English is terrible. I wanted to disappear behind the presentation screen. My manager gently asked, "Can you explain what you mean?" I took a breath and corrected myself. "Sorry. I mean the project is delayed." She nodded and said, "Got it." Then the meeting continued. That was it. No dramatic music. No angry manager. No career-ending disaster. Yet for the next hour, I kept replaying the moment in my head. This is something language learners often experience. The mistake is tiny, but the emotional reaction is enormous. When you are already nervous about speaking, one error can feel like proof that you are not capable. I knew the English words. I simply chose the wrong one under pressure. My brain had not failed, it had rushed. That distinction mattered. After the meeting, a coworker came to my desk and said, "Don't worry. I do that in meetings too." I looked at her and laughed. "But English is your first language." She shrugged. "Exactly. We all mess up." That sentence stayed with me. I had imagined that fluent speakers never made mistakes. Now I was watching a native English speaker make mistakes without treating them like personal tragedies. That changed my approach to English practice. Instead of trying to eliminate every mistake, I started practicing recovery. If I said something incorrectly, I learned to say, "Let me rephrase that." If I did not understand, I said, "Could you say that again?" If someone used an expression I did not know, I asked about it later. These simple phrases gave me control. I also began listening more carefully to how coworkers communicated. I noticed that workplace English was often shorter and simpler than the English in textbooks. People said, "Let's fix this, I'll check, can you send that over, and we're good to go." These expressions were practical, natural, and easy to remember because I heard them in meaningful situations. Slowly, my fear became smaller. My English did not suddenly become perfect. Something better happened. I became less afraid of being imperfect. That confidence followed me home. I stopped replaying every conversation at dinner. I became more present with my husband and children. But then my work schedule changed, and the pressure of adapting to American office culture began following me through the front door. One evening, my husband looked at me across the dinner table and asked a question that had nothing to do with my job, but everything to do with what my job was doing to our family. When work followed me home, my husband looked at me across the dinner table and asked, "Are you really here with us?" I almost laughed because I was physically sitting right in front of him. My body was at the table. My mind was still in the office. I was thinking about emails, deadlines, tomorrow's meeting, and one sentence my manager had said that morning. My children were talking about school, but I was only half listening. Then I noticed my daughter waving her hand in front of my face. "Mom, are you listening?" she asked. That question hurt more than any difficult meeting. I realized that learning American office culture had become more than learning how people worked. I had started carrying the office home with me. I wanted to prove that I could succeed. I wanted to understand every conversation. I wanted my English to sound confident. I wanted my coworkers to trust me. None of those goals was wrong. The problem was that I had quietly made work the center of everything. My husband did not ask me to quit. Instead, he said, "I just want the person who comes home to actually come home." I understood him immediately. The next morning, I decided to change something small. I stopped checking work messages during breakfast. At lunch, I took a real break instead of eating while reading emails. When I left the office, I gave myself 5 minutes to write down unfinished tasks. Then I went home. This simple habit helped my brain separate work time from family time. It also helped my English. When I was less exhausted, I could listen better. I noticed that communication at work and communication at home had something in common. People want to feel heard. My husband did not need a perfect answer. My children did not need my full attention every second of the day. They needed to know that when I was with them, I was actually there. Psychologists often discuss the importance of attention and boundaries because constantly switching between tasks can increase mental fatigue. I could feel that fatigue myself. My brain was like a browser with 37 tabs open, and somehow one of them was playing music I could not find. So I started creating small boundaries. No work during family dinner. No business emails after a certain hour. And when someone spoke to me, I tried to look up before answering. Slowly, our evenings became warmer. My husband and I talked more. My children told me more stories. Even ordinary moments felt different. One night, my son spilled juice across the table. Instead of worrying about the mess, I laughed. Well, that was dramatic. He laughed too. I realized I was learning something deeper than workplace culture. I was learning how to choose what deserved my attention. But my biggest cultural lesson had not happened yet. A few days later, a coworker said something during a private conversation that I misunderstood completely. I thought she was criticizing my work. I went home upset, convinced I had finally discovered the cold side of American office culture. The next morning, I almost confronted her. Then I learned what she had actually meant, and suddenly, I felt embarrassed for a completely different reason. I finally understood American workplace culture. The next morning, I walked into the office carrying 2 things, my coffee and a completely wrong idea about my coworker. I had spent half the night thinking she had criticized my work. In reality, she had been trying to help me. During our conversation the day before, she had said, "You might want to rethink that approach." I heard the sentence as rejection. She meant it as an invitation to improve the idea. When I finally asked her directly, she looked surprised. "Oh, I wasn't criticizing you," she said. "I thought you wanted feedback." I laughed nervously. I did. I just didn't understand the tone. She smiled and said, "That makes sense." That 5-minute conversation taught me more about American office culture than weeks of observation. Culture is not only about food, holidays, clothing, or accents. It also affects how people give feedback, disagree, ask questions, manage time, and express respect. I had been translating English words, but I had forgotten to translate the situation around those words. From that day, I became more curious. Instead of immediately deciding what someone meant, I started asking, "Do you mean we should change this part? Are you suggesting another option? Can I get your feedback?" These questions became useful English listening and speaking practice. They also prevented unnecessary misunderstandings. I noticed that many coworkers appreciated direct clarification. Nobody expected me to magically understand every cultural signal. In fact, asking questions often made communication easier. I also learned that American workplace culture could value initiative. If you saw a problem, people often expected you to mention it and suggest a possible solution. That idea was uncomfortable at first because I worried about stepping outside my role. But my manager explained, you don't have to know everything. Just bring the problem and your best idea. I liked that. It gave me permission to participate without pretending to be an expert. I began speaking more during meetings. I still used simple English, but I used it with purpose. I noticed a problem. Here is one possible solution. I'm not sure yet, but I can check. These sentences were not impressive. They were useful. And useful English gave me something textbooks never could, confidence in real situations. I also became more comfortable with workplace boundaries. If I could not finish something on time, I learned to communicate early instead of hiding the problem. If I disagreed, I learned to focus on the idea rather than the person. If someone gave me feedback, I tried to listen before defending myself. Slowly, the office stopped feeling like a mysterious place with invisible rules. It became a place where people were simply people, different personalities, different communication styles, different expectations. That realization changed me. I no longer needed to decide whether American culture was better or worse than what I already knew. I only needed to understand it. But just when I thought I had finally figured out the rules, I made my biggest cultural mistake yet, one that affected an important project and forced me to face something much deeper than English. My biggest cultural mistake. The mistake happened because I was trying too hard to be polite. That sounds harmless, but in an American office, my idea of being polite created a problem. During an important project, my manager asked if I could finish a task by Friday. I smiled and said, I'll try. In my mind, that meant, I will work hard and do my best. My manager heard something different, uncertainty. She assumed I might not finish on time. I did not realize this until Thursday afternoon, when she asked, are we still on track? I proudly said, yes. She looked surprised. I thought you weren't sure. Suddenly, I understood the problem. I had been using polite language without realizing how it sounded in that workplace. I wanted to avoid saying no. Instead, I gave an unclear answer. The result was confusion. Nobody was angry, but the project became harder than necessary. My manager later explained, if you can do it, say yes. If you cannot, tell me early. We can solve a problem. We cannot solve silence. That sentence stayed with me. I realized that communication is not only about being nice. It is about being clear. This was especially important for my English learning. I had spent so much time worrying about grammar that I had forgotten something more practical. The listener needs to understand my intention. So I started practicing clearer phrases. Instead of I'll try, I said, yes, I can finish it by Friday. Or, I need one more day. Or, I can finish part of it by Friday, but not everything. These sentences felt uncomfortable at first because they were more direct. But they were also honest. My coworkers responded well. They knew what to expect, and I knew what I had promised. This experience also changed the way I communicated with my husband. I realized I sometimes used the same unclear language at home. If he asked, "Can you help me tonight?" I might say, "I'll see." I thought I was avoiding conflict. In reality, I was creating uncertainty. So I began saying what I really meant. I can help after 8. I'm too tired tonight. I need 10 minutes first. Surprisingly, our conversations became easier. Clear communication reduced guessing. And less guessing meant fewer arguments. My children noticed too. One evening, my daughter asked me to help with her homework while I was preparing dinner. Instead of trying to do everything at once, I said, "Give me 15 minutes, and then I'll help you." She accepted it immediately. No drama. No negotiation. I laughed because apparently the secret to family peace was not a magical parenting technique. It was a clear sentence. I had entered the American office believing culture was about how people dressed, greeted each other, or drank coffee. Now I understood that culture could influence something much deeper: how we say yes, how we say no, and how we tell the truth without hurting people. I felt more confident than ever. Then my manager gave me an unexpected piece of feedback. She said I had changed dramatically, but she also wanted me to stop trying so hard to fit in. Her words made me pause. Because maybe adapting to a culture had started to make me forget an important part of myself. My family saw a different me. My manager's words followed me home that evening. Stop trying so hard to fit in. I thought about them while driving through the familiar streets of my American neighborhood. For months, I had been watching everyone around me. I copied phrases. I adjusted my communication style. I learned when to speak, when to listen, how to give feedback, and how to say no. All of that helped me. But somewhere along the way, I had started asking a dangerous question: am I doing this the right American way? My husband noticed that I was unusually quiet during dinner. He asked what was wrong, and I told him about my manager's advice. He smiled and said, "Maybe you don't have to choose between adapting and being yourself." That sentence made sense. I had been treating culture like a uniform. I thought I had to put it on completely to belong. But culture was not a uniform. It was more like learning another language. You could learn new expressions without forgetting your original voice. That idea changed the way I looked at my work. I could appreciate direct communication without becoming cold. I could respect deadlines without becoming obsessed with work. I could speak simple American English without feeling ashamed that my English was still improving. Most importantly, I could bring my own values into the workplace. I valued patience, family connection, and taking time to understand people. Those qualities did not disappear just because I was working in an American office. In fact, they became strengths. One afternoon, and new coworker came to my desk looking nervous. She had recently joined our team and was struggling to understand a meeting. I recognized the expression on her face immediately. It was the same expression I had worn months earlier. I understand the words, but I do not understand what is happening. I smiled and said, "Let's go through it together." We reviewed the meeting notes slowly. I explained a few workplace phrases and told her not to worry about asking questions. When she thanked me, I realized something unexpected. I had started this journey trying to learn how to fit into American office culture. Now I was helping someone else feel comfortable inside it. My English practice had become more natural too. I was no longer studying only for myself. I was using English to explain, listen, support, and connect. That made every word more meaningful. At home, my children also saw the change. I was less anxious. I laughed more. I stopped bringing every little office problem to the dinner table. My husband said, "You seem lighter." I knew exactly what he meant. I had stopped trying to prove that I belonged. I was simply participating. There is a difference. Belonging does not always mean becoming like everyone else. Sometimes it means being confident enough to remain yourself while understanding others. That realization made my work life calmer, but it also changed how I thought about success. I had spent months trying to become the perfect employee. Now I was beginning to wonder whether the perfect employee was even the goal. What if the real goal was building a life where work, family, culture, and identity could exist together? That question became impossible to ignore when my company offered me a promotion that looked like the opportunity one had been waiting for, but accepting. It could change our family life again. I stopped trying to fit in. The promotion arrived on a quiet Friday afternoon, almost too quietly for something that could change my life. My manager asked me to come into her office and closed the door. She smiled and said, "We would like you to take on a bigger role." My heart jumped. For a moment, I forgot every difficult meeting, every awkward English sentence, and every cultural misunderstanding. I had worked hard, and someone had noticed. Then she explained what the promotion required. More responsibility. More meetings. More decisions. More visibility. And, most importantly, less flexibility. I thanked her and asked for time to think. That was not easy for me. Earlier in my career, I might have said yes immediately because I wanted to prove myself. Now I had different questions. How would this affect my children? What would happen to our evenings? Would my marriage become another item on my calendar? I took the offer home and talked with my husband. He did not tell me what to choose. Instead, he asked, "What do you want your life to look like 5 years from now?" I smiled because it sounded exactly like one of Daniel's questions. We talked about money, career growth, family time, and the kind of example we wanted to give our children. I realized I did want the promotion, but not at any cost. So I prepared for another conversation with my manager. This time, I did not apologize for having boundaries. I said, "I am interested in the role, but I need to discuss the schedule." My voice was calm. My English was simple. I explained what I could offer and what I needed from the company. My manager listened carefully. Then she said something I never expected, "That is reasonable. Let's see what we can change." I walked out of her office feeling strangely proud. Not because I had received the promotion, but because I had represented myself clearly. I finally understood that adapting to American workplace culture did not mean accepting everything. It meant understanding the environment well enough to participate confidently. I could respect direct communication and still be warm. I could work hard and still protect my family. I could speak English with an accent and still have valuable ideas. That was freedom. I began noticing how much my old fear had controlled me. I used to think every mistake could damage my career. Now I understood that thoughtful communication often mattered more than perfect performance. Research on language learning consistently emphasizes meaningful interaction and repeated use, and I was experiencing that firsthand. The more I used English for real decisions, the more comfortable it became. My vocabulary grew because my life required it. My listening improved because I needed to understand people, not simply pass a test. And my speaking improved because I stopped waiting for perfect sentences. Eventually, the company agreed to a schedule that worked for both sides. I accepted the promotion. At home, we celebrated with a simple dinner. My children wanted cake, my husband wanted quiet, and I wanted both. Somehow, we managed. That night, I looked around the table and realized something important. I was no longer trying to become someone who belonged in America. I was building a life that belonged to me. But one final lesson remained. It would come from the promotion itself, and it would completely change what I believed success meant. Culture changed how I see success. The promotion changed my workday, but it did not change me in the way I expected. I had more responsibility, more meetings, and more people asking for my opinion. A few months earlier, that would have sounded like success. Now, I looked at it differently. On my first week in the new role, I arrived early, opened my laptop, and saw a long list of tasks waiting for me. My old instinct was to say yes to everything. I wanted everyone to know I was capable. Instead, I paused and asked, what actually matters today? That question saved me from turning my new position into a 24-hour emergency. I began learning how to prioritize. I delegated when appropriate. I communicated deadlines clearly. I protected time for my family. Most importantly, I stopped measuring my value by how exhausted I was at the end of the day. In American workplace culture, I had discovered that productivity was not simply about staying busy. Results, communication, accountability, and collaboration mattered too. That changed my idea of success. I also became more comfortable speaking English in professional situations. I did not suddenly become fluent overnight. There was no magical morning when I woke up and discovered perfect grammar hiding under my pillow. My progress was much quieter. I listened carefully during meetings. I repeated useful phrases. I asked questions when I did not understand. I explained my ideas using simple words. I learned from feedback. These small actions repeated over time made communication easier. I started noticing another change. My children were watching me. They saw me practice English. They heard me say, "I don't know yet, but I can learn." They saw me make mistakes and continue. I realized I was teaching them something without giving a single formal lesson. I was showing them that learning does not stop when you become an adult. One evening, my daughter asked why I still practiced English when I already had a good job. I smiled and said, "Because there is always something new to learn." She thought for a moment and said, "So your job is still teaching you?" I laughed. Yes. Every day. That conversation made me think about culture again. We often talk about adapting to a country, a workplace, or a language as if the goal is to become perfect at fitting in. But real growth is more interesting. You learn from other people while keeping the parts of yourself that matter. You become more flexible without becoming empty. You become more confident without becoming arrogant. You learn to communicate directly without losing kindness. You learn to protect your boundaries without building walls. My husband noticed the difference too. One evening, he said, "You finally look comfortable." I knew what he meant. I was no longer performing confidence. I actually felt it. My American office had surprised me because I expected culture to be something outside me. Instead, culture had become a mirror. It showed me how I listened, how I spoke, how I reacted to disagreement, and how I defined success. And when I looked into that mirror, I finally understood the lesson I had been learning all along. The office lesson I will never forget. I still remember my first morning in that American office. I remember the glass doors, the coffee, the strange greetings, the nervous smile on my face. And the feeling that everyone else understood a secret rulebook I had never seen. Back then, I thought my biggest challenge was English. I was wrong. My real challenge was learning how to understand people without immediately judging them through the lens of my own expectations. Today, I still work in the United States, and I still hear phrases that make me pause sometimes. But I no longer panic when I hear something unfamiliar. I ask. I listen. I learn. Those 3 simple actions have changed my professional life and my personal life. My office taught me that culture matters because people communicate more than words. A sentence can sound direct but still be respectful. A disagreement can be healthy. A quick greeting can build connection. A request for feedback can be an invitation to grow. And sometimes, "I'll try" can mean something completely different from what you intended. I learned to communicate clearly without losing kindness. I learned that asking questions is not a sign of weakness. It is often a sign that you care enough to understand. My English improved because I stopped treating every conversation like an exam. I began listening for meaning instead of translating every word. I practiced short phrases that I could use in real life. "Could you explain that again?" "Let me make sure I understand." "I see your point." Here is another idea. These sentences became small bridges between me and the people around me. More importantly, the lessons followed me home. My husband and I communicate differently now. When we disagree, I try to understand before defending myself. When I am tired, I say it instead of pretending everything is fine. When my children talk, I try to put my phone down and listen. These are small things, but small things repeated every day can change a family. I also stopped believing that success means becoming someone impressive in other people's eyes. Success, for me, means waking up with purpose, doing meaningful work, speaking honestly, learning continuously, and still having enough energy to laugh with my family at the end of the day. My American office culture surprised me because it forced me to question many assumptions. But the greatest surprise was discovering that I did not have to choose between adapting and being myself. I could learn a new culture and keep my own values. I could speak simple English and still have something important to say. I could build a career without sacrificing my marriage. I could grow without forgetting where my heart was. If you are learning English and sometimes feel embarrassed because you do not understand everything, please remember this. You are not failing because you need more time. You are learning another way of seeing the world. Listen slowly. Read again. Speak one sentence. Make mistakes. Laugh at them when you can. Then continue. Because sometimes, the sentence you are afraid to say is the sentence that opens a new door. My first day in that office taught me how uncomfortable learning can feel. My life taught me why it is worth doing. And now, whenever I hear someone say, "Culture matters," I smile, because I know the answer. Culture matters, but understanding people matters even more.